This program is rated PG. It contains themes and scenes which may not be suitable for very young audiences. Parental guidance is advised.
Be advised that the views and opinions of the hosts and guests do not reflect those of the station.
Industry representatives dismiss these arguments, yet proponents of alternative medicine believe the situation is even more dire, accusing companies of only manufacturing drugs that treat symptoms, and also of ignoring diseases that affect population segments either too poor or too small to turn a profit. It's important to remember that these companies are not one monolithic entity. They compete and seek to turn as much of a profit as legally possible. But what are the laws exactly? How are they written? And how do they affect you? According to a growing mass of critics, that's something Congress doesn't want you to know.
For in the end, each new discovery finds its way to the local retail pharmacy. The corner druggist acts as a distributor of medical products in every part of the nation.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Philippines Uncut. I'm your host, Buddy Kunanan. Now, on this show, we talk about everything under the sun, and tonight is about the medical industry, in particular, big pharmaceuticals, their products, and the different controversies surrounding them. And joining us in this very interesting topic is Dr. Nikki Isaacs, visiting evolutionary psychologist. Dr. Nikki, welcome back to Philippines Uncut.
Thank you.
Yeah, we had a very nice talk a few weeks ago about addiction.
We did.
Yes, and now we have a brand new topic, and I'm so glad you're here because this is something I've always want to talk about, and it's good to have a resource person of your caliber and stature here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yes, ma'am. Now, let's talk about your background, Dr. Nikki. Tell us about your practice and your practice as an evolutionary psychologist.
I spend a great deal of time working with people that have addictions and have been a therapist. I've also been a CEO of a hospital and integrated various treatment modalities to help patients. Evolutionary psychology, however, is a way to approach our lives today. The world that we were raised in 30, 40, 50 years ago as we became educated and went to public schools is a very different world than we live in today. And we need to evolve with the knowledge that we have. And so in order to live in this world, if businesses can only do a 5-year business plan and it's outdated, chances are most of us in the world that haven't kept up with the news really do need to know what's cutting edge out there.
Yes. What led you to this field, though? You mentioned a very diverse background. What led you to this field?
What led me to the field was actually overcoming my own addictions and then being led to go to graduate school to figure out what would actually work because traditional medicine didn't work for me.
When you say traditional medicine, what does that pertain to?
That pertains to using a 12-step program or going to a traditional rehabilitation center. And since that didn't work for me and I had always been a very high achiever, it didn't make sense to me as to why these steps didn't work. And so when I finally was able to ascertain how to clean myself up, I decided to go to graduate school and figure out the way to connect the dots and what made sense. In America, most disciplines, medical disciplines, don't talk to each other. They work in silos. And so
silos.
Yeah, and when that happens, you know, connecting the dots is left to the consumer, and it's not unusual, whether it's the coffee debate, the sugar debate, the aspartame debate. In the final analysis, it's left to the consumer to decide which side of the coin on any health issue that you want to be on.
Excellent. Now, you're in the Philippines for some work. What is the purpose of your trip here?
I came to do a seminar on natural healing of addictions, and I did that 2-day seminar earlier in the month. This week, I'm also a forensic handwriting expert, and so I'm doing a 2-day seminar on handwriting analysis and the forensic application of that and how that interfaces with medicine and mental health. And then I'm actually looking at relocating here and retiring. I've joined the Zonta group, and I will be doing a seminar on empowering women before I do leave.
When is that going to be? That's another very
We
interesting topic.
we don't have a date for that yet, but we will soon.
We'll be sure to promote that when it becomes certain.
Perfect.
The date comes,
Thank you.
is more finalized. Okay. Let's talk about the medical industry. You mentioned that, in particular in the U.S., the medical fields are kind of like segmented into silos.
Correct.
Why is that? Why do you think it's so? Shouldn't they be working together?
They should, and
Yeah.
it's just very competitive, and the American Medical Institute was there first, planting their flags, so to speak, with their particular philosophy that is directly opposed to more of the naturopathic ways. And so it's a territorial dispute, and it's a philosophic dispute.
Yes, yes. And do you see it being replicated in other countries in the world?
To a certain degree, I have to say that it's a breath of fresh air to be here and to see so many wonderful naturopathic services that are available here, and the practitioners can be open and available to your citizens, because in our country, the FDA might come into a naturopathic clinic and take all of their supplements or close them down, and there really are activities to make all of these things banned and illegal. And so because there is no licensure and honoring of those practices there, it makes it very challenging to obtain the services.
Why is it so regulated in the U.S., for instance? How come you mentioned there's so many, a lot of regulation, a lot of licensing requirements? So why is that?
Well, because it's a challenge with the Medical Association, and it's a challenge to the MDs. The only actual practicing naturopathic doctors that don't have a horrific time are those that do have a licensed medical doctor behind their name.
Yes, because it seems very ironic, no, that one's healthcare should be one's choice.
Correct.
And if you don't want to go to the Western conventional route, and you want to try the natural way or alternative way, it should be the person's choice.
It should be.
And yet, as you said, in America, this freedom is almost being curtailed. Almost.
Almost curtailed. There's two sides to the coin. The physicians and the folks that are practitioners have been trained in a particular way. So their mindset is, this is the right and correct way. And they're not broad-minded enough to look at a multiplicity of disciplines that might be able to achieve the same thing. So from their perspective, it's a public health risk, because it's not something they understand. And it's a very different kind of a modality.
Yes. How come it's so closed off? I mean, how come? I don't even know where to start with this. With this topic, because it's so intertwined when you talk about the medical schools, the doctors, the pharmaceutical companies. But let's start with that. How come, in your opinion, how come it's so closed? How come their mindsets are very limited in that way?
I think over the years, what has happened is the birth of this huge money-making machine. And it's based on, in America, a disease model, not wellness. And so, for instance, when you start with just the fact that the medical schools do not teach nutrition or prevention, but they teach you how to deal with chronic disease and give you a prescription pad,
Yes.
this begins to foster the picture of the lack of integration there, when the naturopathic side of things looks at prevention and the nutritional side to heal, where the prescriptions themselves are just going to mask symptoms and not really heal the problem.
Yes. Now, you mentioned a very interesting word, chronic disease. Do you believe in diseases being chronic? Like, you know, they cannot be healed, or it's recurring, or it's something you have to live with? Do you believe in that?
I personally do not believe that. However, it depends on the belief of the person.
Yes.
You know, a really good example is Stephen Hawkins. He was given 2 years to live when he was diagnosed 50 years ago. Okay? Now,
Yes.
he has become the world's most foremost cosmologist and outlived that prediction by 50 years based on what he believes, because he's engaged, he's passionate about what he's doing, and he has a joy for life, even though some of us might look at him and say, because of his physical disabilities, how could he have joy? But he does.
Yes. And you also mentioned that medicine, Western medicine, often treats a symptom
Yeah,
and not the actual cause.
correct.
Why do you think their paradigm is that? How come it's such a focus on the symptom and not the cause? Because it just makes sense from a layperson's point of view. It would make perfect sense to treat the source of this illness. No?
Well, years ago, the American Medical Association, it wasn't an association then, but the American medical model was based on the work of Newton, versus most of the Asian things have then aligned themselves with the emerging work of Einstein, where your energy medicine, your acupuncture, all of those kinds of things that validate the medicinal properties of Tai Chi, of many practices, your Ayurvedic modalities and things, where the Newtonian works is much more production line and linear thinking, and it doesn't allow room for the unknowable, the invisible, the energetics.
Yes. Now, okay, this seeming collusion between big pharmaceutical companies and the medical industry, is this fact, or is it like or fiction? Because, you know, some people, two schools of thought. I mean, there are those people who say no, it's just, you know, in people's imagination. There is no collusion. And then on the flip side, you have people who say that no, this is the big bad wolf. You know, you're looking at.
Well, there appears to be a lack of transparency, and that lack of transparency on the part of the big farm companies has certainly lent to the conspiracy theories. And there's an awful lot of evidence on that side. When you see that the ex-lawyer of Monsanto is now the director of the American FDA.
The Food and Drug Administration?
Yes,
Okay.
that certainly doesn't bode well when Monsanto is the huge target of, you know, all of the concerns about GMOs.
One of the biggest biotechnology companies in the world.
Absolutely.
It's a monster. It's a giant.
It's a giant.
Yes.
And, you know, there is so much emerging research, and people really are starting to understand the challenges. We have 3 states now in the United States that have created state laws that force food companies to put GMO labeling on their food, and that's actually quite groundbreaking for them to do that. But the food companies now are suing the states. So it'll be really interesting to see if they, you know, plan on financially breaking those states
Yes.
to set the standards for the 29 other states that are standing in
preparing.
line to do the same thing.
Yes. Now, let's talk about you know, this sort of collusion between the doctors and medical schools and big pharmaceutical companies. Because a lot of us have had experience with doctors, and we go to the doctor's clinic, almost immediately, the first thing they do is they bring out the little pad with their handwriting that only they can understand, and they
Correct.
prescribe some sort of drug for you, or I mean, for you or for me to take. Now, you know, it's strange because it seems like a knee-jerk reaction, really, when you come to their office, and this is almost automatic on their part, you know. And I just want to get your opinion on that issue. Like, I mean, obviously, there's a very close relationship between doctors and pharmaceutical companies.
Certainly, they get trial packages to be able to give to patients. There's alleged kickbacks. There's trainings and expensive travel opportunities for the doctors and their families and those kinds of things. So that certainly doesn't speak well to transparency in the need for actually the drugs.
Yes.
And you know, if you're only trained one way to give medicine and you have no other tools in your toolbox, what are they going to do?
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, Dr. Nikki, I don't know what the situation is like in the States, but here in the Philippines, I have some friends who are doctors, and I know for a fact that when they have conferences overseas, they don't spend for this out of their own pockets. I mean, it's the pharma companies that spend for them and their spouses, and they fly first class, they stay in five-star hotels. When they have conferences here, it costs maybe ₱1 million or 2 million pesos, or maybe $30,000 or $40,000 in your money. The pharma company pays for it.
You bet.
And so my question to you is, how can a doctor, how can a medical professional be objective when obviously you're being comped, you're being shown you're being treated left and right?
You bet. I think it does compromise one's ability to see clearly and does inject some bias there. We certainly have lots of examples of that. There was breaking news in the LA paper not too long ago about over 500 scientists from the National Institute of Health that were detected to have taken money from Big Pharma. And in America, they need to report it. It's not illegal, but they need to report it. And so it makes you really wonder about the clarity or the lack of bias in any reports that any of those particular scientists would have written.
Yes, and at least there is some sort of reporting. I'm not sure in the Philippines if you have that kind of mechanism where doctors do have to report whatever gratuities they get or monies or support in whatever manner or form from pharma companies.
And I'm not sure that our doctors need to do that, but at the government level, if you're a scientist, you need to report those kinds of things. So that's a challenge. But you know, when 42% of big pharma drugs are purchased by Americans, that's a huge chunk of change.
Absolutely.
And with the growing size of middle class around the world, in a number of countries actually, they're projecting that big pharma will be worth $1.6 trillion a year by 2020.
That's a big business. Huge business.
It's almost up to the food industry. The food industry right now is about $3.5 trillion a year.
And so it goes back to that argument. The mere fact it is such a big business. What makes what makes any business successful? Repeat purchases, repeat customers, returning customers. No.
Exactly.
And so I pose this question to you, Nick, Dr. Nikki, before we pause for a break. In your opinion, is the medical industry interested in healing really, or is it all about just keeping people holding on, so to speak?
I think there's a lot of challenges there for what people's real motives are. You know, what you may have started medical school with as your motive to heal may have changed dramatically, much like the politician that goes into politics to realize that he's not really doing the kind of helping work and humanitarian work that they may have thought they would do.
Very good answer. It's a very different world from the theoretical to what really is out there when you finally join the business and get on with your practice. And I guess to rise up in that field, you really have to play ball with a lot of different interest groups.
And it's challenging because to be a whistleblower in today's world, you risk the chance of being killed, ostracized, blackballed from your profession, all of those kinds of things. So it's a really horrific challenge, and these are, the biggest cartels, if you will, in the world.
Absolutely, and at the end of the day, it's a media game. It's a perception game. It's a propaganda game, and they have very deep pockets, as you mentioned.
You bet.
The business is $1.6 trillion. I mean, that's a lot of money.
You can buy a lot of spin doctors for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
A lot of publicists, a lot of press.
Exactly.
Yes. Anyway, Dr. Nikki, we have paused for break. But we're going to come back. We're going to talk about vaccines and our favorite topic, GMOs, when we come back after a break. So guys, stick around because more of the medical industry, vaccines, and GMOs when Philippines Uncut returns.